A trust isn't about being wealthy. It's about making sure your money goes where you want it to go and stays protected when it gets there.
This video is for educational purposes only. Always consult professionals before making legal, tax, and investment decisions. Here's the problem. Most people hear the word trust and think it's only for the ultra-wealthy, or they think it's too complicated to understand. Really, neither is true.
A trust is just a tool. And like any tool, it depends what you're trying to accomplish. Today, we're going to break down how trusts actually work in plain English, what they do, why you might need one, and the questions you should be asking yourself. So let's start with the basics. Think of a trust like a safe deposit box. You put assets inside the safe deposit box. That could be money, it could be property, it could be investments, it could be gold coins. And then you write down instructions for how those assets should be managed and distributed. Now here's the key. To open your safe deposit box, you need two keys. You have one, and the bank has the other.
In a trust, the bank is the trustee. That's the person or company responsible for following the instructions you wrote. They're your gatekeeper.
And the people who benefit from what's inside, those are the beneficiaries. Beneficiary could be your spouse, it could be your kids, it could be multiple generations of people.
So you've got three roles. The person who creates the trust, that's you, the trustee who manages it, and the beneficiaries who receive the benefits.
Yeah, that's it. That's the basic structure of trust. Everything else is just a customization based on what you're trying to accomplish.
So why would you put money in a trust instead of just leaving it outright to your kids?
Well, let's talk about the reasons, because there are a lot of them. The divorce rate is somewhere in the neighborhood of 50%. And if you leave money directly to a child, and that child ultimately gets divorced, some of that money could potentially wind up with an ex-spouse. A trust could help protect against that.
What about lawsuits? What if your child gets sued? A car accident, a business dispute, whatever it may be. Money held in a properly structured trust may be protected from those creditors.
Or what if there's a problem you don't see coming? It could be a gambling issue. It could become an addiction, poor financial judgment. A trust lets you provide for someone without handing them a lump sum that they might mismanage. This sudden wealth is oftentimes very difficult for people to handle.
The old rule of thumb was if they don't have their act together by 30, they're never going to. But times have changed. That age is likely closer to 35 or 40 now.
That's right. The point is, a trust gives you control over how and when the money gets distributed. You're not just hoping for the best. You can build in a layer or several layers of protection.
So let's talk about the two main categories of trust: revocable and irrevocable.
So a revocable trust, sometimes called a living trust, is one that you can change or you can cancel anytime. You control it. You can take the money out. You can rewrite the terms of the trust. Complete flexibility.
So why would you use one? Couple of reasons. Privacy for one. When you die, your will becomes a public record. A trust does not. Some people don't want their financial affairs out in the open.
Avoiding probate is another example. In some states, probate is expensive and time-consuming. Where we live in Pennsylvania, that's not the case. But in a lot of states, when our clients relocate, we work with their legal counsel, and oftentimes they recommend revocable trusts. And the revocable trusts lets those assets pass directly to their beneficiaries without having to go through the probate process.
Or planning for incapacity. If you become unable to manage your own affairs, a revocable trust with a successor trustee already in place makes this transition seamless.
Now, an irrevocable trust is different. Once you put money in, it's gone. You can't take it back. You can't change the terms of the trust.
So why would anyone do that?
Oftentimes for taxes, mostly estate taxes, wealth transfer taxes, inheritance taxes. If you're trying to move assets out of your estate so they're not counted when you die, an irrevocable trust is often the tool.
Yeah, there's also asset protection strategies that require irrevocable trusts. The trade-off is control. You give up control in exchange for protection or tax benefits.
If you're starting to see how trusts might fit into your own planning or realize you have questions you haven't asked yet, consider subscribing. We'll break down these strategies so you can make smart, informed decisions.
Here's something important to understand. The word trust is like the word vehicle. A vehicle can be a sports car or a minivan or a pickup truck. all vehicles, but they all do very different things.
Trusts are the same way. The structure depends entirely on what you're trying to accomplish. So let's try to use an example. Say you want to leave money to your kids, but you don't want them to have full access till a certain age, let's just say 35 years old. You'd create a trust that holds the money and releases it at that age, 35, or maybe in stages. Maybe they would get a third at 25 and a half at 30 and the balance of it at 35.
Now, say you're in a second marriage, which happens often today. You want your spouse to be able to use the money for the rest of his life. But when he passes, you want whatever's left to go to your kids from your first marriage.
And that's a completely different structure. So let's think about this. Take a step back. You've got two levels of beneficiaries, both with competing interests. So your spouse obviously wants to live well, and your kids, they want to inherit as much as possible.
So the trust has to balance both those interests, and the trustee has to navigate them.
And that's why the design matters. The goals drive the structure, not the other way around.
Speaking of the trustees, let's talk about one of the biggest mistakes people make.
Yeah, and that's naming the wrong trustee. So let's go back to that second marriage example. You create a trust for your spouse with your son as the trustee. Sounds pretty reasonable, right? He's smart, he's responsible. But let's think about the dynamics and the competing interests. Your spouse needs money. She asks your son. And your son is thinking, every dollar she spends is $1, one less dollar that I get to inherit.
Yeah, that's a recipe for conflict, and it can destroy relationships and families.
Assuming there is already a good relationship. You'd have to have a good relationship to destroy it.
And there may have been when you wrote it, and that may have eroded in problems.
Yeah, we see the same thing with siblings. One child is responsible, one's a spendthrift. The responsible one is named trustee for the other. And suddenly, every request for money becomes a fight because the responsible child doesn't agree with what the spendthrift child wants to spend, and everything becomes a fight.
Yeah, so now you've just pitted your kids against each other, essentially. Sometimes the answer is a corporate trustee, which is a trust company that manages the assets professionally. They don't have emotional skin in the game.
Yeah, but corporate trustees can be cold and impersonal. We've seen local trust companies who were really well thought of with high levels, high touch, high level service get bought by big banks. And they thought, oh, we're going to remain independent. We're going to remain independent. And all of a sudden, everything's handled by a call center 3 states away, which is really a bad experience for the beneficiaries.
So that's why having a personal CFO involved really matters. Someone who already knows your family, understands the dynamics, and can work alongside the trustee to make sure things actually function the way you intended.
Let's give you a few more examples of how trusts get used in the real world. So Sam, talk about life insurance trust.
Yeah, life insurance trust is a very common use. You create an irrevocable trust, gift money into it each year, and then the trust buys a life insurance policy. When you die, the death benefit is paid to the trust, not to your estate. That means it's not subject to estate tax.
And that money could be used for different reasons. It might be used to pay estate or inheritance taxes, could be used for a whole lot of reasons, but it's usually a tax-free benefit to the next generation. And our mother has an irrevocable trust, so it's not just for billionaires. Everyday high net worth families use them too.
Another example would be protecting an elderly parent. If someone is at risk of fraud or financial abuse, putting their assets in a trust with a trusted family member or professional as trustee can add a layer of protection.
Or think about multi-generational wealth planning. If you want to pass money, down to your kids and ultimately your grandkids, and you want it to stay protected along the way, you could structure a trust to do exactly that.
The point is, trusts are clearly not one size fits all. They're customized based on your situation, your goals, and the people involved.
Here's a thought experiment. Imagine you're Jeff Bezos in 1998. Amazon's just getting started. And you say, I may have an estate planning problem at some point. I want to get this money out of my estate. So you put some of that early stock into a trust for your family. You put it into a irrevocable trust. You give it away. You can't get it back. And then what happens?
So in that case, the stock grew from almost nothing to billions of dollars. But because it's in a trust, it's outside of your estate. The growth happens outside of your taxable estate.
Yeah, now nobody knew Amazon was going to become what it was, but the principle holds. If you have assets that might appreciate significantly, like a business or stock or real estate, getting them into a trust early can have huge tax implications down the road, positive tax implications.
That's the kind of forward thinking that separates families who preserve wealth from those families who lose it.
So here's where this lands. If you're thinking about trust, the question isn't, do I need one? The question really should be, what are you trying to accomplish?
Am I trying to protect assets from divorce or lawsuits? Am I trying to control when and how my kids receive money? Am I trying to reduce estate taxes? Am I trying to provide for a spouse while at the same time preserving assets for my children?
Each of these goals, each of these examples points to a different structure. And the details matter: who the trustee is, how the distributions are handled, what flexibility is built in.
So this is where having a personal CFO really helps. Someone who can ask the right questions, coordinate with your attorney, and make sure the trust actually does what you need it to do.
Yeah, so hopefully the trusts aren't as complicated now that you understand some of the basics. They're just tools designed to give you control and protection over how your wealth gets managed and, more importantly, gets distributed.
The key is matching the tool to the goal and making sure all the pieces, the trustee, the beneficiary, and the terms all work together.
So if you're wondering how to protect your heirs from things that destroy wealth like divorce, lawsuits, bad decisions, we go deeper in the next video. We'll show you how families use trust to create invisible layers of protection around inherited assets, so the money stays in the family even if life gets complicated. You can watch that video now.
And if you're looking at your own situation thinking, I really need someone to help me figure out what kind of trust actually makes sense, we'd be really happy to talk. Click the link below to schedule a conversation.
Because at the end of the day, investing really is the easy part. Making sure your family is actually protected, that's what takes the thought and planning.